These days, it's easy to forget that Sebastian Vettel is a four-time world champion. Just like Max Verstappen after him, Vettel was a superstar prodigy who became the youngest Formula One champion in history at Red Bull. But 8 years after his last title, he's dropped a long way down in the standings. Now driving for Aston Martin, the end of the road looks near for the German. But are there any last chances for this former racing great? And how did Lance Stroll almost end both their races in France? Stay tuned, because all of that and more is coming right up. Sebastian Vettel rose through the ranks as quickly as any driver. He became the youngest Formula One driver to win a Grand Prix at the 2008 Italian Grand Prix, which is a record that was only beaten by Max Verstappen. And on top of that, it was Toro Rosso's first and only win. That was enough to earn him a promotion to Red Bull the following year, and it didn't take long for him to clash heads with his teammate Mark Webber. It was Vettel who scored the team their first win. An athlete's career only has a small window of opportunity, especially for Formula One drivers. That window can be pretty small. Everything has to line up perfectly: the team, the car, and the performance. And when Vettel arrived at Red Bull in 2009, everything was starting to come into place. The team started out as a sponsor before buying at Cosworth and giving the sport a go for themselves. One of the first drivers they employed was a young Australian by the name of Mark Webber, who won some of their first races for the team and who let the world know that Red Bull weren't just there to take part. Then, in 2010, all of the parts of the machine came together, and their drivers Webber and Vettel could finally taste victory. And as the old saying goes, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. Unfortunately for Webber, he was one of those eggs. The two had a long-running rivalry dating back to when Toro Rosso driver Vettel crashed into the back of Webber in 2007, and it only got more heated as the years went on. Next, glory days. Vettel learned from his idol Michael Schumacher and refused to apologize for his ruthless driving, and in the end, it all paid off. He won 4 world championships with Red Bull before moving on to Ferrari to follow in Schumacher's footsteps. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite the fairy tale that he'd hoped for. After losing the 2017 and 2018 championships to Lewis Hamilton, it started a messy divorce between Vettel and Ferrari. Now, the German is at Aston Martin in what looks to be the final stint of his career. Vettel has assured fans that he wants to keep going, but he knows that it doesn't always work out like that. Talking to the media just before the French Grand Prix, he said, "I think there's a clear intention to keep going, and we'll see soon where we stand." The question of where he might be driving next year led to some rumors that he might make the jump to McLaren, and he confirmed that he does know some people there, but wouldn't confirm whether or not he had been having any discussions. McLaren's Daniel Ricciardo has been under a lot of pressure recently from his employer, with McLaren CEO Zak Brown publicly criticizing Ricciardo's performance. And if they are in the market for a new driver, Vettel could be a logical choice. Vettel's problem is that there are a number of young drivers like Oscar Piastri waiting to break onto the scene and offer teams what Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, and Lando Norris have done. Coming up, why was Vettel handed one of the biggest fines a driver can get? And why does Ted Kravitz think that this is Vettel's final year? So don't go anywhere. Now, the French Grand Prix. Talking about younger drivers, Vettel almost had a disastrous collision with his younger teammate Lance Stroll at the French Grand Prix, and after a virtual safety car with just a few laps to go, Vettel was really putting the pressure on Stroll. It looked like it would go down to the line, and it did. On the final corner, Stroll braked early, causing Vettel to almost crash into his teammate just meters from the finish line. After the race, Vettel expressed his frustration. He said, "I closed the gap the lap before. I think I was faster, but it doesn't matter. He was obviously hitting the brakes again, so it caught me by surprise." Stroll crossed the line in P10 to salvage 1 point for the team, but the team were lucky that the teammates didn't crash each other out of the race. Stroll, whose father Lawrence owns the team, defended himself after the race and said that he was just making sure that he secured the point for the team. Vettel leads Stroll by 11 points in the championship, so it's not hard to see why the young Canadian wants to make the most of every point. But still, it was a dangerous move that won't earn him any respect from his veteran driving partner. The latest dispute with F1 drivers and the FIA has been out about how each race is handled, which has led to Sebastian Vettel being hit with a massive fine. Since last year, the FIA have been under a lot of pressure to deliver some consistency. There were a number of puzzling decisions throughout the season, but the final race in Abu Dhabi last year was by far the most controversial. The spotlight was put on race director Michael Massey for interventions made in the final laps of the race that ultimately led to Max Verstappen winning the World Championship. An investigation by the FIA found that it was due to human error, and Massey was removed from his role. So, to try and avoid the race director being put under so much pressure, the FIA introduced a rotating system of 2 race directors. Now, Niels Wittig and Eduardo Freitas have been alternating since the start of the season, but it has seemed to create even more problems. Drivers like George Russell and Fernando Alonso have been some of the drivers critical of how the new system is worse than the old one. Russell said, "I do agree that we need to stick with one race director. We need to have a bit more consistency with the stewarding. The problem is that at drivers' meetings before each Grand Prix, the race director can't explain their decisions from the previous race because it wasn't their decision. And this lack of accountability was too much for Sebastian Vettel, who walked out of a drivers' meeting in Austria out of frustration. He apologized to the race director, but it was too late. He was fined $25,000 and told that he was setting a bad example for young drivers. Next, lost interest. Walking out of a drivers' meeting and some of his other behavior this year has led commentator Ted Kravitz to speculate about Vettel's retirement plans. During his program on Sky Sports, Kravitz said Sebastian seems to be behaving in a few certain and critical ways, like bringing his kids to the racetrack in Austria, that suggests to me that he is going to make this his last year in Formula One. Kravitz also pointed to how Vettel arranged to drive the iconic Williams FW14B around Silverstone at the British Grand Prix. It was the car that won Williams the 1992 World Championship with Nigel Mansell, and Vettel is clearly a big fan because he bought the car 4 years ago. But he also made sure that he did it in a responsible way by using carbon-neutral fuel that he paid for himself. It's part of Vettel's advocacy for climate change action that he has been campaigning for. At the Miami Grand Prix earlier this year, Vettel wore a shirt that read Miami 2060 First Grand Prix Underwater to draw attention to rising sea levels. Then later in Canada, he spoke out about how harmful mining in the country was for the environment. Earlier this year, he became an ambassador for the Bees and Apple project, which is trying to create more sustainability in the food industry. This could be a sign of things to come after his retirement. Vettel has never shied away from promoting issues that he believes in, and he might be able to dedicate more time to them after he is finished driving. Do you think it's time for Sebastian Vettel to move on from Formula One, or should he try to find himself a place for next year? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.